What's going on, everybody? My name is Dick.
And my name is Dave.
And this is the Deep Dive, and we started a whole brand new series called Roots.
Yeah.
And we're really talking about the theology of John Wesley.
Right, the theology and wisdom of John Wesley. That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm excited about it. It was funny on the way home Sunday, we were talking about lunch and a little bit, and then me and Rachel started talking about the sermon and John Wesley's story that you kind of talked us through. And my daughter in the back goes, "Who's John Wesley?" And I was like, it's a good time for this sermon.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Recognize we've got, we got a lot of Methodists in our church, and we are a United Methodist church.
Okay.
We do things a certain way. But we have folks that have either come from no church or from a different denominational background or no denominational background or whatever. And so it's good to sort of remind us where we came from and why we are the way we are. So,
get back to our roots, as they say.
You ready to do this?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Well, Dave, I'm sure you'll talk to us a little bit about your vacation. I know we've done a podcast since then, but you're going to give us a little more.
Right. Well, last week, this is the first week we've done it together in about 3 weeks, I think.
Yeah.
And so, last week, I had just been home a few hours when I did it with Sarah, so I was not the most energetic, but, I've been back about a week now, and so I think
jet lag's gone.
Jet lag is gone. And
oh, thank goodness.
Back in the routine, yeah.
It is always worse coming back.
Yeah, that's good. But you had a trip while.
I did, yeah. Same time that you went, we went down to the beach, to the Tampa Bay area, and it was great. I joked when we came back, I did announcements, and I joked that it was kind of like the Little Mermaid. Like, I was out there and giant schools of fish were swimming around me. I had a manatee swim within like 5 feet of me, like dolphins jumping up. It was really cool.
Who was a Little Mermaid's dad? What was his name? Triton? Is that it?
Yeah, I think so. King Triton.
You could be King Triton.
You think so?
I really do. I think that's your Halloween this year, my friend.
Give me a trident.
Yeah, I think you could do that.
No, I'm not. I am not coming in with a tail. I would fall, bust my face. It would be bad. But we had a good trip. It was good to get away for a little bit. It's also good to come back. We were kind of talking about routine, and I'm also a person of routine, and just kind of getting back to the school routine now, getting back to the life routine, and things are good.
I would like to have more routine, and so I really cherish the routines that we do have. And so one of our routines is doing this podcast every Tuesday. So it's good to be back in this routine, at least for a few more weeks. And we are, we plan out sermon series at least weeks, if not months in advance, hopefully months in advance. We kind of know where we're going with our worship team. And so I knew this was coming. It might have sounded a little bit more spontaneous. Hey, he went to London. He saw John Wesley's house. He's now preaching on Wesley.
Yeah.
I knew this was coming, but I knew that my experiences in London and seeing some things in person that I have heard about and read about and studied about all my life would be important. And I also felt like just in where we are as a church, like, we talked about in the open, that, we have some folks that maybe don't have a Methodist background, but even those of us who do, I think with a lot of what's happening here in American Methodism, it's a good time to remind ourselves of our founder and some of his wisdom and theology and ways, and remember that and kind of lean back into our past, because there's some good stuff there that we need to be reminded of and return to. And so, so that was, so I did go to London, and I did see some of the Wesley sites. As I said on Sunday, this was not a Wesleyan heritage tour, because there's a lot of places in and around England that are significant in John Wesley's life. For example, Epworth, which we didn't go to, is his hometown where he was born and raised, and that born in 1703. And then Bristol was where he kind of began his outdoor ministry, and then Oxford, where he was educated. But there's a lot of stuff in London. And I did go to the Wesley Museum, which is his house there, and there is a chapel there that he had built that was kind of their center for ministry. And by that time, his ministry, not only in England, but in other parts of the Great Britain, Ireland, and other places, and in the Americas and the colonies, was already pretty well established. In fact, America had become the United States by that time. I think 1778 was when, I can't remember. I had all the dates on Sunday. So anyway, but it was significant being there. And I think I told the story on Sunday that I got in there and we're just going, I was like, I went there by myself. Teresa and I didn't go there together. I walked the mile from where we were staying there. And the whole time I'm thinking, this is going to be one of these emotional, transformative moments for me, to see Wesley's house and to sit in that chapel. So I got there and the chapel was pretty serene. There's only one other person in there. There's some piano music that's been pre-recorded, but it's very pretty. And so I sat down like on the second to back row, and I'm just going to pray and kind of meditate and reflect. And all of a sudden, this guy gets up and starts a worship service. And so and I'm looking at
just you, and
it's just me. Okay. And so apparently they do it every day.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe they don't do it when there's not anybody in there, but I guess maybe the time was about 11 o'clock, I guess. And so maybe it was the regular time and he saw, well, there's somebody's here. I guess I got to do it. And it's what you would call a daily prayer service where he was do the readings of the day and, confessional prayer and that sort of thing. But no hymn singing or no sermon. But I really didn't know what I was in for when that happened. I was like, I don't want to be rude and leave here, but I want to see the rest of this museum. And so, but it was fine. I tried
the whole thing.
I did. Of course I did. It would have been rude to get up.
But there's also a time frame where you're like, whatever, I'm gonna leave. This nothing and no. But he was Korean with a pretty deep Korean accent. Okay.
So, but I did the text that he was reading. I did get on my phone and try to meditate and see if God was speaking to me through that. So, anyway, we got back. We talked about Wesley on Sunday, and so let's get into that. And the whole focus of the sermon was looking at a text that I'd used. Which is a very, very familiar, most everybody noticed, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind and strength. Yep. And so if there was any text that would go with the sermon on Sunday, that was a perfect one, because we're looking at how Wesley served, worshiped, followed God with his head, his hands, and his heart. Yep. And so I talked a little bit about his intellect, and his mother was brilliant, very intellectual woman. Much more I could teach and say about Susanna, but she really, I think, deserves most of the credit for raising those children. I think his father was upstairs writing poetry and stuff, but his father was an Anglican priest.
Right.
Wesley would eventually become an Anglican priest. That was their denomination. I guess it's important to point out, particularly people who were there on Sunday, that he didn't seek to start a new denomination.
Right.
He wanted to revitalize the Anglican Church. And so the Methodist movement that grew out of Wesley's ministry was that until, and we'll talk more about that probably next week because it's part of this week's study, how it became the Methodist Church. So anyway, ends up in Oxford. They're a part of this holy club. His brother Charles actually starts that, but there's, if you see the people that were in that club, it's like a who's who of preachers and theologians from that time. Most of the people in that group went on to have very significant ministries, including Charles and George Whitefield. And George Whitefield, particularly in the third sermon, is going to show up a lot. Okay. And so then they go to America, to the colonies. At that time, young people and adventuresome people were, colonies were happening and people were going to America to see what's about. And so Wesley went there with the intention of, being the parish priest, but also he wanted to convert the Native Americans. And so he gets there, and I guess one of the things to stress about the Holy Club that he came out of was they had very, very specific rules that they kept in a certain way of doing things. And I don't want to call them inflexible, but almost, to a very legalistic point. So he kind of continued that sort of style. I'm not certain that it didn't go over with the Native Americans, and I don't think it really went over so much with his parishioners, but he's the pastor and they put up with it.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm talking a lot.
No, you're kind of giving the whole, the base of the story. Yeah. So,
and so, and I talked to him on Sunday, and most people famously know the story of Sophie Hopkins, who was there. Her uncle was a big wig in that community, a colony in Savannah. And so they sort of got them together because the people that would sign up to go to the colonies in America, you can get, those are, you think about those first, you think of pioneer and frontier days, all kind of stuff. It takes a certain personality type to sign up to do that. Yeah. And they're not always the most cultured and pristine and maybe suitable for this woman, who's come from some means and some sort of sophisticated. So they try to get them together, and a romance ensues. But Wesley didn't act on it very much. Actually, part of the reason was he really felt like he could not really get involved in a deep relationship or get engaged until he had finished his mission of converting the Native Americans. And so she finally gives up on him and marries somebody else, and that doesn't go over well with Wesley. And so about the same time, Charles is not having a good time either. His brother Charles is down in St. Simon's Island, Fort Frederica. He's working for General James Oglethorpe. You heard from him? Georgia history? Oh, yeah. Yeah, he's a big guy. He started the colony in Savannah, and he's there. And Charles Wesley and him did not G-haul at all. And at some point, there's this huge falling out. And I don't know if he actually brought charges, but he talked, about treason and insubordination, that kind of stuff. So Charles Wesley goes home, and John Wesley went down there to do some of the priestly functions there. And so if you've been to South Georgia, been to Savannah, you see plaques and a monument to Wesley in the middle. And you go to St. Simon's, you see a lot of stuff about Wesley. Yeah.
Epworth by the Sea's down there.
Yeah. I mean, Epworth by the Sea, it's called there because they were born in Epworth, England. Right. And so this is Epworth by the Sea. There's a Methodist museum down there. There's a little chapel there. Yep. But it's not in honor of the great ministry that either one of them had in the colonies or in the Savannah colony. It's just what came later is what that sort of commemorates. And so,
hey, we were a part of this.
Yeah,
like a part of the story.
yeah.
Because it is interesting.
Yeah,
as you're at this point.
Yeah,
John Wesley and Charles Wesley kind of seem like they've just really failed.
They did.
They
did.
Which I guess is kind of a cool testament once you hear the rest of the story. I've already heard.
It is. And, and there's times in your life where you have to pivot. And we're talking about a big pivot. But, you think about John, I didn't say this in the podcast. I said it on Sunday. He was delivered from a fire. Their parsonage burned down. There are 15 brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
They got to get all the kids out. And John Wesley nearly died in that fire.
Yeah.
And so he was called brand for the fire. And because of that, he kind of felt like he had this destiny. And I think his mother sort of enforced that with him as well. Yeah. Well, so he felt like he was destined for greatness, and God had spared him. I mean, and not in I don't think in a boastful way as much as this. God spared him to do something great.
Right.
And so he kind of had this feeling, and but they were raised pretty strict. When they were the Holy Club, they were pretty strict. And so they had this, I think, best word I could have for is a very legalistic approach to the Christian faith. Mm-hmm. And so back in Savannah, Charles is gone, and Sophie is married somebody else. And so John refuses to give them communion, denies them communion, which is a really big deal.
Yeah.
And at that point, other people came forward, and They make some charges against John Wesley, and I think there was some part of a trial, but I can't remember the exact details. But I knew that he was still there waiting trial, and he decides to get out of there. And there's a story of him actually having to, wade through a swamp at some point. He leaves literally under the cover of darkness to get back to Charleston. And so he's going back. And one other thing I failed to say in the podcast, but, on the way over there, he'd had this experience with another religious group called the Moravians.
Yep.
And the Moravians, unlike these Holy Club folks, which did great stuff, they worked with their head. We're talking about head, hands, and heart. Their head and their hands were all in the right place.
Yeah.
And they were intellectual. They were studying the Bible in the original language. They were reading the Christian classics from the original source stuff like Luther and others.
Yeah.
And then they were doing a lot of good deeds, is what I would say. They were, they saw that their servant ministry of, visiting people in the prison and feeding the poor, and they even started a little school. And, Wesley, that would be later. Wesley started a lot of schools. That'll be a later thing. But so they had that part right.
Right.
But they just didn't have that joy of the Lord, I would say. They hadn't had that Holy Spirit kind of experience yet. And so, but he saw that in the Moravians, and particularly when there was a really bad storm and they thought they were going to lose their lives, that this boat that they were on was going to sink. And Wesley feared for his salvation.
Right.
He had these thoughts of like, if I died tonight, I'm not sure I'm saved. And the Moravians, on the other hand, they're having like a prayer service, and they're singing hymns, and they're ready to meet their Maker. And John just realized, I don't have that. Yeah. So he gets back to England, and his brother's sick. His brother had health issues a lot, but his brother's sick in Oxford, so he goes to see him, and there with him is a guy who was Moravian, Peter Bowler, and so he has conversations with him about his Christian life and faith, and whether it's impossible to know or not. And Wesley just kind of realized he doesn't have it. He does not have what he was, and he's about ready to quit.
Yeah. And
he asked Bowler, should I just quit preaching? And Bowler says, no, not at all. Keep on preaching. And go out there. He said, well, what in the world would somebody who's not sure of their own faith and having these doubts, what could I possibly preach? And he says, go out and preach faith until you have faith. And then because you have faith, you will preach faith. And so it's kind of a circle, kind of circuitous kind of a statement. But it really makes a lot of I think, with wise sense, that, lots of times in our faith, we will have struggles and doubts, and we want to give up, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I hear from Christians, but I've also experienced, are the spaces to where I wasn't feeling confident in myself, or I didn't know if I had the right words or stuff like that. And sometimes there's just expectations of being a Christian that you feel like you have to live up to, and when you mess those up, you're like, man. But as I tried to understand like what faith was, I could listen to people preach about faith all day long, but to experience it and try it myself was a whole different.
Right.
There was times where it was like, no, I'm supposed to have faith here. I'm supposed to have faith here, like almost convincing. But the more that I tried to have faith, I noticed myself stopping thinking about trying to show more faith, and I was just showing more faith in certain scenarios. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because I think you said it Sunday. It's kind of like a fake it till you make it type scenario.
Yeah. I don't like that phrase when it comes to faith.
Yes.
You shouldn't be faith in a hypocritical way.
Exactly.
But it is, you keep on doing the right things.
Right. And
because it will come. Yeah.
I talked in here about the I'm blanking on his name, Adam Hamilton.
Yeah.
The statement he was talking about when somebody's asking, well, how do you love God? He goes, well, you do I love you things. And after you do I love you things enough, you're going to be in love with God. Like that's so, and it's kind of that concept is like, just try to be doing the right things.
Well,
you'll notice that it's transforming.
And I might get into this next study as we're talking about now. I mean, the Holy Club were very committed to living holy lives.
Yeah.
When you do that, I think part of the path of holiness that we go on is we realize that we have other things that tempt us in life, and whether it's material things or maybe some sort of bad habits, and like we realize this is not filling up our lives. Our lives are missing something, and it's missing that relationship and that knowledge and experience of God. And so the more we start doing those things, then those will come.
Yeah.
And I for somebody who's going through a season of doubt, or they're really trying to come to faith and they've never had it, I know that may sound very mystical or whatever, but it really isn't. I will say over the course of my life, because I'm really old now, is that I've had times when my faith has been really, really real and alive.
Yeah.
And then there's been times when I have really, really doubted and been very, very discouraged and wanted to give up. And, you get on your computer and start looking at your retirement plan. How much, those kinds of things. But, a lot of the times, and this is another one of my favorite little things, is the in-betweens.
Yeah.
And so it becomes what we've talked a lot about here in the podcast, and I know you've called a couple of Bible studies on them, is the practice of faith.
Yeah.
You just keep doing it, and those mountaintop experiences, they will come, but you can't live on the mountain. And so, yeah.
And I dare say, like, I know people who are afraid to step out in faith because they're afraid of failing, looking bad and stuff like that. But I would dare say that the fastest way to grow in your faith is to try things out.
Yeah.
Even if that means you fail the first 10, 20, 30, you know what I mean? However many times. Like, I think if you really want to grow and push yourself to grow in faith, you have to try these things out.
Yeah.
And you're not always going to be successful.
Yeah.
But success isn't the end goal.
Yeah.
The end goal is creating spaces to have more faith, to practice these rituals and start incorporating them into your life.
Yeah.
And if we can look at it in that space, because I think Christians, maybe that's too blanket of a statement, but I think a lot of people struggle with the not instantaneous part of Christianity, to where yes, you are instantly saved, you are instantly accepted by God, but your life doesn't instantly change.
Right.
And understanding that your walk of, as Wesley would put it, sanctification.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like
you're talking Methodist language right now.
Yeah. Yeah. But your walk there is going to be filled with a journey of things that don't go so well and some things that are going to go so well. And that's important to understand, is that your journey doesn't end with becoming a Christian. It actually starts, or that part of your life starts, and it's a different journey.
Right. Yeah. I mean, lots of times the way that Christianity has been drawn up is just like you make this decision to accept Christ, and there you've done it. That check mark is there.
Yep.
But really, that's just the beginning.
Right.
And I mean, that is the Methodist way. Then you start this journey towards sanctification or Christian perfection or perfecting in love.
Yep.
And it takes you the rest of the life. And it's a hilly, bumpy journey at times. And
we see that in the story of Wesley.
Yeah.
The story that you talked about.
100%.
A lot of ups and downs,
particularly everything. The other thing I was thinking about was that I'm trying to think of the author's name now, but you can look up the title. It's called The Sin of Certainty. It's a book I actually listened to on an Audible book. So sometimes when I do that, I don't remember as much about the author.
Sure.
But yeah, The Sin of Certainty, in that, I see him in the early part of his life, the Holy Club, and even on the first part of his journey over on the ship, of having that. It's like he was certain of what he... And then what happens with that is, when we built our faith that way, it's like having this brick wall, and we built this very solid brick wall, and then somebody's come along and pulled out one of the bricks, and the whole thing is toppled over, and it can really, it can kind of really knock us off our feet. Sure. And I think we see that happen to Wesley in a couple of ways. First, for just having the experience of the Moravians, having the little success that he had with his work with the Native Americans, and then just not being particularly the most beloved pastor in his parish.
Yeah.
All that shook him to the point of giving up, and so he meets Peter Bowler, who gives him that little advice. Keep doing it, just like what we've been talking about.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I looked up the book, The Sin of Certainty.
Yeah.
The author's name is Peter Enns.
Peter Enns, yeah.
If you want to look it up on your own,
yeah,
sorry,
it's a great book. I wouldn't mind doing a Bible study on it one time.
Yeah.
But it is, and I think particularly when we've been in the church for a while, we're guilty of that. Hey, we know the way.
Yeah.
That's right. And so when something upsets or some other information presents itself, it can really knock our feet out from under us. And so God's always doing a new thing, and and so it's I think it's important to keep ourselves open to that. So the Moravians had these groups are called societies that they would meet in, and Wesley joins one of them after he's met Peter Bowler, and so this is getting up to the Aldersgate experience. He still keeps doing those things. He goes to church in the early part of the day at St. Paul's, and in his journal he even writes what the text is. And then he says some interesting. He says, "I went reluctantly to this meeting that night," which is like a Bible study, and somebody was reading. He's not mentioned by name. Somebody is reading from Martin Luther's preface to the commentary that he wrote on the Book of Romans, which you can Google. Yeah. Which I've known about this for years that it existed, but last week is the first time I ever took the trouble to actually look it up. And it's pretty easy to read, and it is pretty powerful. You can see how someone would be moved by that.
Yeah.
And so he was the guy was reading that, and he had this what he called a heartwarming experience, and he felt in his heart strangely warmed. And so he had this experience, and we'll be unpacking this, particularly this coming Sunday and everything about just his ministry afterwards. But like it was, it was like, something, a light switch got turned on in Wesley. And we talk about the head and the hands and the heart coming together. He had the head and the hands, but when that heart came together, and like somebody was telling me after the service on Sunday, he's heard like, it's hard to make that 15-inch journey from head to heart. But once he did that, it changed. Yeah. And so then, a little bit later, George Whitefield invited him to take over his ministry, which was preaching outdoors. And Wesley, this goes back into tradition, Wesley wasn't sure whether or not he should do that or not. And so, he actually, I didn't say this on Sunday, he actually drew lots to decide, because he was so troubled by this, because church was inside, and it's done in a specific, orderly way.
Yeah.
But he right.
He liked his methods.
But but this is the other part of the Methodist Church.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we do adapt.
Yeah.
And we take it to the streets. And he wrote in his journal, I submitted therefore to be more vile and to stoop to the level of field preaching. So not the best.
So dramatic.
Very dramatic. But it was a big deal for him to do this. But when he did, the first time he preached, there were 3,000 people.
So I didn't know this casting loss. So he kind of did like the old, you pulling the flower petals off. I'll do it. I won't do it.
There's biblical examples of that. I mean, they did that to get the 12th disciple after Jesus died. So, I think he was doing it. He wasn't doing it like we would go out and throw dice or something.
Yeah.
But,
come on.
Yeah, but he was looking at that. It's sort of like putting down Gideon's fleece or whatever. Sure. It's like, God, you've got to help me. I can't decide whether or not to do this or not. And so, that the rest, as they say, is history, and we'll unpack more of that in the sermon and next week on the deep dive as well. But one thing I did want us to discuss a little bit, and that is that the experience, the Aldersgate experience, because and sometimes there are more than one in our lives, but we have these profound experiences in our life that change us and transform us. And there can be a tendency to hear something like this, particularly for someone who's struggling in their faith or is new to their faith, or is exploring their faith, to hear something like that and say, I've got to have this same kind of
Like
experience.
some aha moment or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And there's even denominations that are based on experiential kind of stuff that say you got to have this experience.
Yep.
And everybody's experience is going to be a little different.
Yeah.
Mine's going to be different than yours.
Sure.
And ours is going to be different than John Wesley's. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Especially when I was younger in faith, I thought that there had to be some sort of glorious moment, because I went to so many like youth rallies and stuff like that where the speaker was like, I had a gun to my head and some for some reason something happened. It's like, and that's when I knew God was all powerful. And I was like, man, I have to have some sort of hardcore thing to know that God's for me, but as I looked at John Wesley's life and even in my life, like, I just kind of said yes to some things.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, mine happened like on my first mission trip with the youth group. And really it kind of happened even like afterwards. We got back, I just did a week of like good stuff. And yeah, we did the worship services, but it wasn't like I had some strangely warmed experience or anything like that. It was in my bedroom as I was reflecting on what I just did.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It wasn't so crazy, but some people have like these ideas that it has to be this crazy story. And I think God sometimes just comes and
experience
and the norm and kind of shows himself and says like, hey, I am still here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Experiences can be subjective. Sure. And I think experiences of faith, you know when you know, but sometimes, I particularly think as a young person, you and I have both have a background in youth pastorates, and we know, you hype up a kid on sugar, you put them on a roller coaster, you show them a scary movie, they're about ready to have an experience.
Sure.
And then you have some dramatic speaker come in and tell this horrifying testimony of having a gun to their head.
Yeah.
And, and so then it's easy to step back from that and say was that real?
Yeah.
And so, and that's the thing about experiences. There is a step of faith in that. But I do think the testimony of, I grew up in the church. I heard people talk about the love of God my entire life. I've always known the story. I've always known that God loved me and sent Christ to die for my sins. And I've always known that story. But through these experiences, this when it became real for me. Right. We've had the head knowledge, but real with that. And it's, God can use those crazy things, but it will come. But for me, it's more of the latter that I just said. Yeah. I was a church kid, and but I did have those experiences. They were at places like, the altar at Camp Glisten and stuff like that, and thank God for them.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think all can be used and stuff like that. I don't want anybody to think that because they didn't have a certain level or have a crazy story or something like that, that they haven't experienced God in a real way. Because, sometimes it is, a response to a great sermon at the end of camp week. Sometimes it's going to be somebody said something really meaningful to you while you were out to coffee with them, and it all just click. Like, you'll know when like you'll feel it. But
standing. These have been profound moments for me. Is standing out on a really clear night at the beach.
Yeah,
and just considering the enormity of the universe, and
right.
From the sands that are there to all the stars, and this sort of transcendent holiness that kind of comes over you with this loving God that loved and created all of this. Right. And so, one thing about those is they're sometimes kind of hard to articulate and put in words.
Yeah.
But what I did want to emphasize that everybody's is unique. You don't have to have mine or Nick's or John Wesley's. Your experience is your experience.
Yes.
And, however God has used that to bring you closer to him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is kind of the part one of how many?
There's going to be three. There's only supposed to be three.
Okay.
Because we got another series that's sitting there ready to go, but we might have to push it back because there's a lot to cover.
Yeah.
But we can come back to it. But
Sure.
But it's sketched out into 3 sermons so far. Yeah.
So this is kind of part 1 of 3 for now, maybe 4.
Yeah.
But as we're going through this story, consider your story as well, and how God, remind yourself, like, if you're somebody who's been a Christian for a long time and you've experienced God in a way, consider your story too, and how God has been faithful through all these stuff. Because I think the thing we see with John Wesley's life is through the ups and downs, God did not leave him, and showed himself in a mighty way. And it's the same in your life, or if you haven't had that experience yet, come talk to us, come talk to me or Dave. We'd love to sit down and help, help understanding,
pray for you,
stuff like that, pray for you. And,
Yeah.
And like we said, don't, it doesn't have to be some crazy experience. It's whatever, it's going to happen in your story, in your way. And we want to help facilitate that if possible.
But and one other thing that I would say to reiterate that is that it does oftentimes comes from the head, and it's hearing maybe a clear message of salvation, and understand, and we'll talk some more about that next week too. But it's not. I don't think it's going to necessarily be independent of the other two.
Sure,
the head and the hands. Definitely. I mean, some of the great experiences I've had have been using my hands in service.
Yes. And
God has seemed very real. I used to say, if you want to find Jesus, go to the poor, go to the poor. Because, just where Jesus said he'd be with the least, the last, and the lost, you often find him there. You always find him there if you're able to see him. But also the head's important, the intellect and understanding, God's love and God's plan for us.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, I think this has been awesome, a good podcast, and we just want to say thank you guys for watching and taking it in. And as you are watching, if there are any questions or anything you need some more clarification on as it comes to John Wesley's story or something we've talked about, feel free to drop it in the comments section. We do check those out. And other than that, I think we've had a good time.
That's been good. It's been good to be back. So God bless everybody, and we'll hopefully see you on Sunday. If you can't be in church, watch us online, and we'll talk about it next week.
That's right.
All right.
We'll see you guys next time. Y'all take care.
Bye-bye.